Hey, welcome back everyone. So in this one, I want to give you some tips and suggestions on cross-hatching. So I'll just pick an area. You see I've already kind of started this gargoyle thingy. And I think I'm going to show you a little bit of the ear because this is a tricky spot to shadow. I'll do a couple of these spots and really just talk about, what to do after you've placed some shapes of shadows. After you've grouped some shadows, you see that line right there? It's pretty nasty. I got to fix that. Generally, after you save it out, you really don't see a whole lot of that, but maybe you might, so I probably should fix it. But I'm on the rendering stage of it, so you can see I did my shapes of shadows there. I started with a more solid set of shapes and then broke off into some other forms. And if the form like the cheekbone raises back up, then I'll start again with a larger form, breaking off into smaller ones. So that's my very simplistic approach to shadows and this type of light source. But just to give you an idea, this one's going to be more about the cross-hatching. And keep in mind, the reason why is because when I do these time-lapse videos, I glance over a lot of stuff, right? Well, when I do these real-time, it's hard to encapsulate all of this into one particular video. I mean, it would just be hours and hours long, and that's generally where I point people towards my course content, because if you really want to know like all the details, all the things that go into it, then that's where that's more suitable. I'll make sure that stuff's linked in the description box below if you want that kind of training for it. But for this one, we're just going to focus on some cross hatching, and I know a lot of people struggle with this, and I know I've had my battles, especially with shadows and cross hatching, but you really just have to jump in and do it. What I tend to try to do is taper all my lines. It's just the type of look I like. It's not that you have to do that. I typically rotate, I hold R and rotate the canvas in a way where it fits the ergonomics of the way that I draw, the mechanics of my hand, which gives me a better sense of control. And so I'll just taper these lines, and then I blend them off, I fade them off, like so. And I don't mind little hiccups like that. Sometimes I'll go back and fix that. And there's times I leave it just to kind of check. Say, what, does it really need to be fixed? And then sometimes I like it more when there are these little blips, hiccups, freestyle effects, whatever you want to call it. Just basically like everything doesn't have to always be as perfect as you might think. In fact, sometimes when it's too awfully clean and precise, it looks fake. Like AI, right? Like AI art looks fake in a lot of ways because it's just too overly generated. And I feel a little bit guilty because I have these custom brushes that do this cross-hatching. I don't think they're a bad thing. I think that they can suit a purpose, just like halftone, screens, which you don't see as much in comics. You still see it in anime or manga, I should say. But yeah, they all suit a purpose. But if they're overly done, they really suck the life right out of the work. So you want this hand, human element to the work, and that can even be flaws. Or maybe not even flaws, just variation. I'm creating variations as I go through this. It's one of the reasons why I don't like putting all the lines identical. Like in this area, I'd probably keep it all going the same way. It's not like I'm going to put some lines going in this direction, and then I get over here, and I'm going to start doing some that are noticeably in this direction, and then noticeably back this way. I mean, you can have little variations, but I typically will do that in different areas. So you can see that the line work here is very different, but then these two are consistent with one another. Okay, so just little things like that. And that's just, again, this is so subjective as to what you want to do. The main thing I think that's important to pay attention to is just the gradients that you're looking for. You do want some continuity in the thought process of it. You don't want to be too rambunctious, I don't know what the word is, too unfocused, and you're just doing whatever, whenever. So one thing that I pay attention to is that when I come back to the work, I might be in a very different state of mind. Sometimes it's for the better, and sometimes not so much. Like I might be in the, the zone the night before from having like a long stretch of drawing under my belt, which means I'm generally pretty warmed up. And then the next day I might come in and I'm just not feeling it, but I want to get it done. So I pay attention to that, and usually that's kind of noticeable, unfortunately. But there are the other times which are nice, where I come in and I'm immediately like, oh no, what was I thinking? I can make that way better. And then I just sort of go into the illustration with a lot more clarity. And I think that happens more often than not, because all of this is problem solving. So when we get to a point where we start to understand our subject matter more clearly, then generally it goes smoother. We generally start to say, oh, you know what? I got a better idea. And it's not really a better idea. It's just you have more clarity on the initial thing that you were trying to achieve. Like many things, it's just, that amount of time spent just kind of opens the mental block for you. I think a funny comparison is like when people do paintings where they just blob in color. I'm not as good at it, but I've been playing around with it. But what you'll hear the painters talk about is getting past the ugly stage of the work. And I think that's such a neat thing. I try to think about it even in terms of pen and ink. It's a very different, digital ink obviously, but very different concept or series of ideas. Not too different. There's some similarities, but it's very different. But anyways, I try to think about it in terms of that, because there is still that aspect where you might be working on something and you just got to get past the part where it's not looking as cool, and you got to keep developing it. And that takes confidence in your abilities and your process. But sometimes it's disheartening because you're looking at, this isn't looking right. And how many pieces did we give up on that would have worked out had we just continued down the road? So, but when you watch painters do that with that blocking in phase, it looks very ridiculous at points, but then once you see them pull it all together, you're like, whoa, that's mastery right there. That's pretty cool. And the same thing happens with this stuff. It's that's why I break down the process for a lot of people, is I want them to see it. It is stages, and sometimes it starts off really poorly. I kind of mentioned in our last video. Well, you know what? I got it right here. So I just did this one of dark side. God, I do that every time. But anyways, there it is. And I'll tell you, right through here, I was not feeling good about it at all. I mean, look how dopey he looks right there. It's such a silly shot. I don't know. It does not look like dark side at all. And then I made some shifts in the shape of the eyes, widened the head, all sorts of things. So from here to here, I started to feel better. And then once I dropped in the shadows, and again, this is redundant, I said it in the other video, but once I dropped in the shadows, I felt good about it. And that's when I was able to let go and start inking and having fun with it. Because I built up a sense of confidence right in between 2 and 3, and more between 3 and 4 of the areas, the iterations. So again, it's that looking past the idea that it's not as it's not looking as good as you hoped or something, or you're not quite seeing it. Sometimes you just have to keep pushing forward and being dedicated to your work, being diligent, and persistent and all that good stuff. And also, you got to realize that that's where you get your chops. That's where you get your ability to do this stuff on a professional level. Now, I don't work on a monthly title or nothing like that, but at the same time, I feel the confidence to do that because I can knock this stuff out in a way where I generally can be pretty productive with it. Some days better than others. So hopefully you can see here, I've kept really a consistent look. I'm thinking about the light, light hitting here, and other areas kind of being a grayscale gradient. So light here, and I just continue on with that. Now I could have brought line work, and I can even test this. So let me show you something. Like, let's say that I pull back. I'm like, oh, you know, it kind of doesn't have the amount of shadow that I wanted. Now, I'm fine with it. I actually like the look the way that it is, but it's easy enough to add a layer, come in here and say, well, you know what? Let me just, and this doesn't apply to just digital. I could always say that. I don't care what you're using. You could just be using, you know, regular pens and paper. It doesn't matter. You might want to make a copy of something if you're going to experiment more, but that's up to you. So my experimentation is just adding a layer. But I might get in here and say, you know what? I'm going to take these very thin lines, all parallel. I'm not even trying to curve them around the form. I don't know if that's a mistake or not. I'm not really looking for that. I'm almost thinking of this, again, almost like I mentioned before, similar to a zipatone or something like that. People are probably like, what is that? Because, you know, I don't think it gets used ever these days. Shows my age, I guess. But, you know what I mean? Like you could do something like that. And then all of a sudden now you've got this additional gradient that's blending into the forehead more. And actually I like that. I wasn't thinking I would like that as much as I do. I might keep that. But that's the beauty of adding these and being able to test the work like that. I would take that same thinner line, add it right through here. Now the other thing is this. I really recommend, you know, I guess it depends on your level of expertise, where you're at as an artist, but I really recommend playing around with the different thicknesses of line weight, texture, cross-hatching angles, all these variables, so that you can find what your style is. But one of the things I really like about introducing lots of different line thicknesses is that basically it gives you more variation of gradient and tone and texture. It just makes it more interesting. So if I do everything like this and I really like this style, I would say this is something that I picked up by watching like David Finch's rendering, a lot of things, shapes of shadows, stuff like that. I can't do them anywhere near as good as he can, but I try to pay attention to it when I can. But the thing is that here, I think that like this style of rendering, I really paid attention to McFarlane, and there's all sorts of people. You just have to like try these different elements. So like another thing is, say you're rendering a character like this, and you're like, okay, I got these thinner lines, I've got this heavier cross hatching. You know, what else could I add? Well, I mean, anything really. I mean, you could get in here and just add some little stipple effects, right? All of this stuff, you could add some little breaks over here like this. You could add some little scratchy lines right through the middle of it. I don't really like those, but what I'm saying is that you kind of have to just start throwing things in there and seeing what you can come up with. But all of it, I think, is food for thought. It's not all going to be winners. You're not going to keep every bit of it, but a lot of it is going to really, I don't know about a lot. You know, all of it's going to make you better because you're going to be experimenting and learning and not falling into this habit of rendering every single area identically. I think that, to me, that's the biggest problem that I see anyways. And you know, if your style looks good that way, then that's not a problem at all. But I see some people that will render things, you know, it's almost like you get into a rut, you know, and it's very easy to do that, especially if you're kind of unsure of your territory or your footing. So you basically like go with what's safe, right? Well, what's safe? What you just did before. And although there's times for consistency, for sure, I'm doing that now. I'm going back to the cross hatching that is consistent with the other parts of the wrinkles in the brow. But then there's times that you want to add variation, you know, cool areas of that stand out independently from others. And to me, like I mentioned a little while ago, I think that helps with this feeling of scale, because if you have lots of cool variations in your line rendering, then it almost feels like something is more massive and more monolithic. Like it's just, it just has more to look at, more to appreciate. Like, so if you're back here and you're like, oh, it looks pretty good, and you're like, wow, it looks even cooler as you zoom in. I kind of find that to be a winner, at least for like the larger pieces where it's a close-up shot. You know, you wouldn't do that on, if this is some panel in the background, you would not do all this. You would definitely wouldn't want to zoom in like I'm doing, but I'm purposely doing that. I want something that's, you know, more detailed. Okay, so let me finish off. I'll do a little bit on this ear, which I'll probably slaughter because this is like actually a tricky spot to do. But another thing I want to show you is like, you know, so keep in mind this area over here, I would consistently go up. Well, I'd probably do this part, and then I'd blend off this way with the same texturing I did there. And that's really it. I would continue on that way. But with the ear, so you see I've kind of established this shape right here for a shadow on the side of the ear. I don't know. When I rendered it, it just didn't look good. So what I would probably do is try a couple other things. I know I want there to be some shadow over here because I just feel like it's going to push the ear away from the head. Probably have a little bit of shadow right about there. Obviously a big drop shadow below it. But I feel like there needs to be a shadow right here. I could be wrong, but what I'm going to do is start with this. So sometimes you can just block in a shape, and I would try to make it not look too clean of a shape. I don't know. It's kind of tricky. Like, so I could look at this ear shape and say, well, I don't know, it just needs a big shadow like this, right? And I could render off of that. But I kind of tried that already before I started the video. I didn't really like it. And so what I want to try is just bring in some lines away from this shape of shadow. So this is another thing I think is a good exercise to do, where you just place this random shadow. It could be the side of a character's face. It could be just a bunch of these on the page. It could be this. This actually works really well for background effects. You know, like when you're just trying to texturize a background, you can just throw these little blobs in and render off them. And I think that's really good practice, by the way. I've done that a lot over the years, so that's probably one of the things that's helped me crosshatch. And by the way, in case anybody wonders, or is wondering, I'm using a SenseLabs tablet, regular tablet, looking up at the screen, and I couldn't render like this for a long time on this particular type of device, and I just kept at it. So just keep that in mind that you can do it. It's going to feel really weird. It felt weird for me for probably years, but I also didn't commit to it all at once like I should have. I had my Cintiq and my iPad Pro, and I just had these other options. And finally, my Cintiq broke, and I was like, nope, I'm going to go for it. And I'm really glad that I did, because this is a way more affordable tablet. So anyways, and by the way, I'm not paid to say that. They did do a sponsorship video on my channel, but I no longer get paid to keep saying that. I'm being legitimate, you know, because if you guys know me on the channel, I don't even like sponsored videos. I'm not even trying to do anymore. Like, I'm not trying to be swayed to say this is good, this is bad. If it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's junk, and I'm going to tell you. Anyways, all right, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to render away from this and break up that kind of blob, that kind of harsh shadow. I feel like that almost works. Let me see. But I want to show you how to experiment with this. So like, say that's too harsh for it. I don't think it is. I think that works, and I'd probably do a similar little thing. I think it's better than carrying the shadow all the way through here. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just not rendering it right. Or it could be that it starts thicker, it thins out somewhere in here, and it gets thicker again. You know, it's just good to think about these shadows as not even shapes, not things that are just, I mean, there's areas of the body where you want it to look relatively even, because, put it this way, you got to think about it like this. Like if you have a cylinder over here, right? Well, that's easy. It's easy to say, well, you know, light's over here. You're going to get a shadow that's pretty even on the cylinder like this. You know, maybe a little bit of bounce light, or, you know, rim lighting on the other side, whatever. And then you start to render. Better than that, obviously, but just to give you an idea. But that's not anatomy, right? Anatomy is far from a cylinder. It's going in and out, highs and lows and all this. So again, I would really play around with trying some different organic shapes of shadows. Now, another thing that I recommend you practice, so, say you put this in, you're like, well, it's kind of all right, but it's too strong, right? And I like toggling this stuff on and off and really checking it out. And again, zooming in and out, checking it from distance. But you can always go back with a transparent, I always get those mixed up. Translucent brush, I'll say. And you can go back and you can break this up a little bit more. And there's really, to me, there's no rhyme or reason. I like to just keep messing around with different angles and different thicknesses of lines and then see what I see. Is it better? Is it worse? But you can do some really nice like halftone gradient effects like that as well, just by kind of starting more harsh, then going back and erasing it in different angles. Pretty easy to do, and I like the look. I'm going to go back to this because I feel like I can always do that more towards the end stage, and I want to show you what I meant about, I feel like if I add like another little shadow right about here, the lobe area, and I feel like he needs like a couple creepy little wrinkles right under the ear to up the creepy factor, and then go to, I don't know, let's say here, and then have it thin out a little bit like this. Again, I'm trying to just fight the urge to throw like an oval shape in there or something. People I like to pay attention to, their shapes of shadows. I already mentioned David Finch. Ivan Reis, R-E-I-S, right? Does a lot of DC work. Has a really neat approach to the shadows. So does Jason Fabok. I'm sure you know about his work and the way he like does these very organic shadows. He's got a very strong influence from David Finch, but then he also, I think he changes the shapes of shadows just a little bit differently. Yeah, so pay attention to everybody. And a big one that I've been studying a lot, and I can't get enough of, but I got a lot of studying to do, is Frazetta. Frazetta's work, just shadow, everything about Frazetta, but lately I've just been studying his shadows. So take in food from thought from every artist you can. So now I feel like what this has done is made it too rounded in this one section. So I'm going to go back and cut through here. Bring these a little further away to kind of disconnect these from one another. So I can just cut this any way I want. I can really kind of sculpt it. I feel like I don't like this even shape right here. I don't know. Just too aligned. I feel like even that looks a tad better. Still not totally digging it. Let me pull back a little bit, see if I can see what's bothering me about that. I'm perplexed, I'll tell you. But that's where when that does happen, I just move to a different area. I'll leave it for a bit so I can kind of digest it mentally, process it. Maybe that's a better term. And then I'll go over to an area like this, and same thing. Just keep repeating this, like thick to thin lines. Practice breaking up these lines at times, like I've already mentioned. I think that's a good look, a little more interesting. All right, and then I'll come over here, crosshatch this way just a little bit. Again, breaking those up even here, thick, and then kind of stutter step it a little bit. Like that look. Yeah, and you just keep going on and experimenting. Another one, and I'll leave you with this, and then I'll bring it to a close, is don't be afraid to go right through the middle of the illustration as well, and see what you can get. Like sometimes just break it, and those are really messy lines. Let's try that again. Sometimes just breaking some lines up this way, right through the middle of the form, can make it look pretty interesting as well. So don't feel like you always have to come off of a shadow. Yeah, I think I'll bring that over a little bit. Like, actually, if I take that, I don't know what that's connected to. Bring it over this way more. So what it's doing, or at least what I'm imagining it's doing, is I'm kind of thinking about the front plane of the character's forehead as I do that. But you can really do that all over the place. And then, as I mentioned before, these little types of effects do a lot for it as well, make the artwork look more interesting. So play around with those. And yeah, you could just, I mean, you can go crazy with this stuff. And remember, you can always take it away if it doesn't look right. You could drop in some lines like this with like quick strokes. You can see I'm not as good at that. They're like going in different directions, which is kind of weird. And then you can go back and like hit the other side, like give it a bit of a belly, like the middle, and then push the other way. Kind of gives them these little bit of I don't know, fish hook appearance or spear-like appearance, something like that. And again, just all sorts of things. I don't really like that. It almost looks like he's got a scar on his head, which probably wouldn't be a bad idea. That'd be kind of neat. But there you go. So I know it's not a very, depthy thing. We didn't do a whole lot of area there, but this stuff takes a tremendous amount of time. It's still a lengthy video, but hopefully it's an informative video. That's the main thing. And I would love to know what you think. And from here we can have a little bit of dialogue. Let me know what questions you had along the way, what can be improved upon. If you want to check out the course content or any of my digital assets, you can go to my Gumroad. I'll make sure there's links in the description box below for that. I really thank you for tuning in and watching. More content on the way very soon. As always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and bye for now.